Life in the Old West wasn't all about cowboys, saloons, and gold rushes. Beneath the romanticized stories of the frontier lies a harsh, untold reality: hygiene, or rather, the lack of it. Imagine going weeks without bathing, sharing lice-infested mattresses, or drinking water contaminated with human waste. For pioneers on the Oregon Trail and settlers across the Wild West, staying clean wasn't just a challenge, it was often a matter of life and death. In this video, we're pulling back the curtain on one of history's dirtiest eras. From deadly diseases to primitive toilets and lice infestations, we'll uncover the gritty truth about hygiene in the Old West. Stick around, you won't believe how people survived these brutal conditions. Let's dive into this forgotten side of history. But before we continue, please like and subscribe to the channel. Bathing was a rare luxury. Bathing in the Old West was far from routine. Clean water was scarce, especially on long journeys like the Oregon Trail. Most pioneers went weeks or even months without bathing. When they did bathe, it was often in rivers or streams, if they were lucky enough to find one. These rivers were frequently freezing cold or contaminated by upstream waste from other travelers. Water had to be hauled from streams and heated over campfires for sponge baths. Soap was made from animal fat and lye, which could irritate skin if not prepared correctly. Hair care relied on makeshift solutions like egg whites or vinegar rinses. One pioneer wrote in her journal about how refreshing it felt to wash her face after weeks of dust and grime building up during travel, but she also noted how quickly she became dirty again due to constant exposure to dust. Bathing wasn't just inconvenient, it was risky. Travelers often had to strip down in open areas near rivers, leaving them vulnerable to wildlife or even attacks from hostile groups. In colder months, bathing was nearly impossible due to freezing temperatures. Some pioneers boiled water for sponge baths instead of full immersion. Historical accounts reveal that many travelers simply accepted being dirty as part of life on the trail. They joked about their dusty appearances, but knew that hygiene wasn't a priority when survival was at stake. Toilets were primitive at best. In settlements, outhouses were common but far from sanitary. These wooden structures were built over holes in the ground that acted as makeshift septic systems. When the hole filled up, it was covered with dirt or moved to a new location. The smell was unbearable, and flies thrived in these conditions. On the Oregon Trail, there were no outhouses at all. Travelers dug shallow holes near campsites for waste disposal. This practice often contaminated nearby water sources, leading to outbreaks of diseases like cholera and dysentery. Cholera was so deadly it earned the nickname the unseen destroyer. People who seemed healthy in the morning could be dead by nightfall. The lack of proper waste management created significant health risks for pioneers. Human waste often attracted flies and other insects that spread disease throughout campsites. Additionally, animals like wolves or coyotes were drawn to areas where waste was disposed of, creating another layer of danger for travelers. Some wagon trains developed informal rules about where waste could be buried to minimize contamination, but these rules weren't always followed, especially during emergencies, clothing, and lice infestations. Pioneers owned only 2 or 3 outfits that they wore repeatedly without washing for weeks at a time. Laundry was difficult because clean water was scarce, and scrubbing clothes by hand took hours of effort. Dust from trails made clothing filthy almost immediately after washing. Lice infestations were rampant due to poor hygiene and limited remedies. Special lice combs were used to pick out these pests one by one, a tedious task that had to be repeated often since lice quickly returned. Homemade remedies included boiling potatoes for hair rinses or applying rancid vinegar mixed with lard. These treatments were unpleasant, but sometimes effective. Clothing became so filthy on long journeys that some pioneers resorted to burning old garments rather than attempting to clean them. The constant exposure to dust and sweat caused skin infections and rashes that were difficult to treat without proper medical supplies. Children were particularly vulnerable to lice infestations due to their close contact with others in crowded wagons or campsites. Mothers often spent hours combing through their children's hair in an attempt to remove pests. But this was rarely effective for long periods. Diseases spread like wildfire. Poor hygiene created the perfect conditions for disease outbreaks on the frontier. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever, and smallpox were common killers. These illnesses spread rapidly through contaminated water and unsanitary living conditions. On the Oregon Trail alone, nearly 1 in 10 travelers didn't survive the journey. Cholera was especially feared because it struck quickly. Victims could go from healthy to dead within 12 hours. Pioneers carried basic medicine kits that included items like castor oil, peppermint oil, quinine for malaria, laudanum for pain relief, and hartshorn for snake bites. However, these remedies were often ineffective against serious illnesses. Cholera was so feared on the Oregon Trail that some wagon trains avoided camping near rivers altogether if they suspected contamination upstream. Families often carried extra barrels of water, but struggled to keep them clean during long journeys. Doctors traveling with wagon trains faced overwhelming challenges. They lacked proper tools or medicines and often relied on outdated remedies like bleeding or herbal teas. Despite their best efforts, many sick pioneers didn't survive long enough to reach settlements where better care might be available. Shared spaces made things. Worse towns weren't much better when it came to hygiene. Public spaces like saloons often had communal towels that dozens of people used throughout the day without washing them. Mattresses stuffed with straw or hay became breeding grounds for bed bugs and lice. In some towns, spitting in public became so common that laws were introduced to ban it. Violators could face hefty fines or even jail time. In towns trying to improve public health standards later in the century, bathhouses began appearing, but these facilities were expensive and inaccessible for most settlers or travelers passing through briefly. Women's unique challenges. Women faced unique hygiene challenges on the frontier. Menstrual care was particularly difficult without access to modern products like pads or tampons. Instead, women used homemade solutions such as cloth rags or even grass and sheep's wool. Pregnant women endured even greater hardships during long journeys. Childbirth often occurred in unsanitary conditions without proper medical care, leading to high mortality rates for both mothers and infants. Women also had limited privacy during menstruation due to cramped living conditions within wagons or tents shared with family members, adding another layer of discomfort during already difficult times. Sod houses were havens for filth. Many settlers built sod houses out of necessity when they reached their destinations on the prairie. These homes had dirt floors that were impossible to keep clean. Dust coated every surface, and families often poured greasy dishwater on floors to tamp down dirt, only to attract more insects. Snakes, bugs, and rodents frequently invaded these homes through cracks in walls or roofs made from sod. The Old West wasn't just a story of adventure. It was a test of survival in some of the harshest and dirtiest conditions imaginable. From the struggle to stay clean on the Oregon Trail to the constant battle against disease and lice, pioneers faced challenges we can hardly imagine today. Yet their resilience and creativity remind us how far we've come in terms of hygiene and public health. But this is just one piece of the puzzle. The history of the Old West is filled with untold stories of triumph, tragedy, and everything in between. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden side of history, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribe to join our growing community. We've got so much more to explore: stories of outlaws, gold rushes, Native American resistance, and the untamed frontier. So stay tuned because the next chapter of history is just around the corner. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.